You know, as our cities are grappling with the challenges posed by congestion, pollution, and accessibility, the prospect of autonomous vehicle technology offers an exciting vision to streamline and make our systems more sustainable and inclusive as it relates to urban mobility. Now, in this era of mass urbanization and ever increasing markets for efficient and future-proof mobility solutions, adopting autonomous vehicle technology into public transportation networks, it is emerging as being the most promising path into the future and will help us reshape urban landscapes. And we can't forget rural communities that are not able to benefit with mobility, benefit from the mobility that we see too often in our urban landscapes. I think the opportunities for autonomous mobility is endless from an individual standpoint as well as a holistic standpoint. This is the third webinar the JTA has hosted, and we've learned so much on how this technology can positively impact our lives. During webinar number 2, I think all of you heard Ron Brooks tell that story about him and his wife. And Ron, both of them are blind or vision impaired, so to speak. And they had the opportunity to use an autonomous vehicle for a date night, and how this was the first time they had the opportunity to travel alone as a couple, as husband and wife, in a vehicle without another adult actually attending and driving that vehicle. Think about that. Many of us we would take that for granted, but for Ron and his wife, it meant so much. I think about also JTA's partnership with the Florida State College of Jacksonville, where we're working to develop an automation curriculum to prepare the workforce of the future. And along with FSCJ, we will be in the next few weeks deploying an autonomous shuttle on their downtown campus. And it doesn't stop there. We have a partnership with Duval County Public Schools, where we are educating the workforce of the future through our targeted science, technology, engineering, and math programs, bringing kids to our innovation center and taking them on our autonomous vehicles and allowing them to engage with subject matter experts here at the JTA. So I know this webinar, we're talking about policy and regulation, but let me share with the audience, why are we so passionate advocates for this technology? It's because of Ron Brooks and his wife, and it's about every person that an AV can provide a seamless mobility option to. It's for our current workforce and giving them the training to adapt to this changing workforce landscape, and in turn, inspiring our kids to be innovators and demonstrating to future generations that the viability of our industry and really, frankly, public service is a rewarding career path. So here at the JTA, we're gathering international attention from companies that are looking to set up manufacturing plants here in the US, specifically in our region. So we have the opportunity to really lean in as it relates to economic development in Northeast Florida, creating hundreds of direct jobs and thousands of indirect jobs because of the multi-state supply chain that will occur with manufacturing these vehicles in our home state of Florida. So I look forward to this discussion this afternoon, and thank you to my esteemed colleagues for joining us as we go through this autonomous vehicle journey in our country.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. And I do want to make sure that I reiterate something that stuck with me that you said, the most promising path into the future. And you have to start somewhere to get there. So thank you for everything that your authority is doing in here at the JTA. On to our next panelist is Carolyn Flowers. She is to my right. She is the managing principal of InfraStrategies. Carolyn spent 2 years at the Federal Transit Administration as senior advisor in the last 9 months of the Obama administration and served as the acting administrator. From 2010 to 2015, Carolyn served as Chief Executive Officer, Director of Public Transit for Charlotte Area Transit System, which is known as CATS, for those of you joining us from there, with responsibility for bus and rail transit planning and operations. Some of her major accomplishments include reviewing and approving significant infrastructure grant programs, including the $50 million Smart Cities grant and 2 rounds of Tiger Grant programs, and leading FTA's first effort in assuming direct safety oversight responsibility for a transit agency. So Ms. Flowers, I'd love to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. I am really honored to be here. I worked with Nat when he was chair of APTA, and actually one of his major priorities during that time was innovation. And so this spurred what has now come to be U2C. He has been a leader in that space, and I have had the opportunity to support him with his strategic planning as well as with other areas on the government relations side. So the experience of being at FTA is one that I hope that we can share today between Jane Williams and I regarding, how rulemaking is done and what the impact is on those decisions as we go through that process. And being with this emerging technology, being able to talk about what we can do and what we can recommend for future enhancements to the rulemaking as well as grant making is, I think, one that we hope to share today.
Thank you so much, Ms. Flowers. And again, a statement that you made, I think, is going to bode very well in our discussion later, is the impact on these decisions. And you want to make sure that what you are suggesting won't hinder that innovation, but in fact, move it along that much further. So I mentioned at the very start of this webinar that we have representation all across the country, from Jacksonville to other ends of the United States. But what's so exciting is that we do have some international representation here as well from across the pond. So that leads me to our next panelist here is Gavin Jackson. So Gavin, a little bit about him. He is the Chief Executive Officer of OXA, an autonomous vehicle software company located in Oxford, England. He is currently responsible for the company's business and product strategy and global expansion. Having led senior leadership positions in some of the world's most prominent technology companies, including companies like Amazon and Microsoft, Gavin has deep expertise in leading teams and scaling commercial deployment. Additionally, he is a mentor to startup companies and an avid supporter of diversity in technology. We are thrilled to have you here, Gavin, today from across the pond, and thank you for bringing the rainy weather here to Jacksonville and to the state of Florida. So Gavin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and it feels like home from home. I was in traffic, and with the rain pouring down, it just feels like home being here. So thank you. It's really humbling to share a screen with all of you pioneers in this really important space, and I do represent the voice of some international standards and some points of view and some great work that's been happening internationally in the UK, in Europe, in the United Nations level. But I also represent the voice of inward investment and why and how and what the conditions ought to be for companies like us who are growing really fast and have great ambitions to pioneer this wonderful technology towards a new normal for how people and goods move, and to do that right here in the United States. And so we represent that inward investment. We're proud to call Florida, the state of Florida, our second home here. And we plan to be scaling here and living here for a long period of time. So really great to be with all of you today. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Gavin. And I love how you had said, normalize how goods and people are moved. And that's utilizing emerging technology to be able to do that and facilitate that. Definitely appreciate your guidance as well from the international level. So our fourth and final panelist is Jane Williams, who has quite an extensive career in state and federal government. Jane Williams has served as acting administrator of the Federal Transit Administration, FTA, from August 2017 through January 2021, leading the agency through challenging times during COVID-19. Ms. Williams brought more than 25 years of executive experience to her role, having served previously at the Department of Energy and Department of Labor under President Reagan and the Department of Interior under President George H.W. Bush. Ms. Williams also worked in the legislative branch as a senior legislative advisor to a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and additionally, she has served as the state level as a director of Washington Area Transit Office within the Maryland Department of Transportation under Governor Harry Hogan. Jane, welcome as our fourth panelist on this panel. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Raquel, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to JTA for hosting this important webinar series. I'm not surprised by you hosting this, Nat. You have been one of the most innovative industry leaders. And so I'm happy to be here, and I'm honored to participate on this panel with another former FTA administrator, Carolyn Flowers, and both CEO Ford and Jackson. I look forward to our discussion. This is a very, it's a challenging topic, but it's a very important topic. So I wanted to just say a few things about what we did when I was at FTA. And one of the things is innovation was one of 3 centerpiece issues that we had in the previous administration. In fact, it was so important that we made innovation a criteria across all of our grant programs. And as many of you may or may not know, FTA has a relatively small research budget. It's less than 30 million, which in FTA terms of billions of dollars is very small, but it has a significant impact. And that's because research funds that we use them towards, and it includes demonstration projects, which many others don't do. We're actually able to do projects that actually test out different technologies in real time. And that includes automation. So we established a new program while I was there called AIM, Accelerating Innovative Mobility. And we provided $14 million to projects across the entire country, one of which was to deploy AVs to augment paratransit and fixed route bus routes. So one of our significant transit infrastructure projects, of course, is one that you all have mentioned, the Ultimate Urban I want to say connector, and it's circulator, the U2C. It was one of the projects Nat came to me with when I was the acting administrator, using current infrastructure in a very new and innovative way. And I think the way that you've approached it, Nat, has been excellent. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion. And I thank you all for hosting this webinar on a very important topic in our industry.
Thank you so much, Ms. Williams. I think what's so reassuring is, and I think I can speak for Gavin on this, is to hear someone who has worked in the federal government, your dedication to innovation and to move it forward and create those decisions and enable it. So thank you so much for the work, and you and Carolyn do definitely on the federal level to help enable companies like OXA and BEEP to be able to move the needle that much forward. At the end of the day, it needs to be technology with purpose, right? Supported by the policy and regulation to enable it. So Jane, Nat, Carolyn, and Gavin, thank you so much today. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So without further ado, let's just dive right into it. I know this is the heart and the meat and the potatoes of the discussion today. So Jane, I'd love to start with you. So my first question that I have for you is, in order to build public trust, we're seeing a lot in the discussion this day, whether it's on the news or it's a round tabletop discussion, is that building of public trust and the acceptance and confidence in this technology. So how important is that level of transparency in the testing and self-certification for these types of technologies?
Well, let me say, Raquel, thank you for the question. Transparency is key in all things, but when you're trying to get the public to accept this new and very innovative technology, it's very key. Riding in an autonomous vehicle, I have done so in Germany and also in Las Vegas. And I can tell you, it's a little unsettling to be in a car without a driver. You don't really know what to do. You think what's going to happen. I actually was on the Autobahn in Germany in one. And so we have to understand that they're no longer conceptual. They're a reality. And so educating our public on the technology and how it advances mobility integration for them is, I think, incredibly important to their acceptance of it. And so transparency couldn't be more important. I'd also say on the regulatory side, NHTSA advancing their AV step rulemaking and making that rulemaking collaborative with both public and private sector stakeholders, I think is very key. It needs to be a modernized regulatory approval process where everybody has a voice, and it needs to not be prohibitive to the continuous development of AV technology. Having that come will provide more certainty for people. I think, people don't know, the technology is changing so much that people, just when they think they know, like, we're all getting used to having those technologies in our vehicles that tell us, like, uh-oh, somebody's in your lane, you can't go over, or if the automatic braking system and things that are out there in personal vehicles, having that be something that continually emerges in an AV vehicle, I think will help us to educate that public. And of course, JTA's approach with U2C, proving out the autonomous technology in a controlled speed, fixed route, defined environment, eliminates so many of the other variables that I think many are encountering across the country. I can't speak for OXA in England, but I can say across the US that I think if we had that approach more often, it would limit some of the things that have happened. And of course, they always appear in the news. So they're front and center when something like that happens. So I think having the public understand the technology and how it benefits their own individual mobility, I think is incredibly important. So transparency, in short, is key.
You know, I think what's so reassuring is when I look down below here at Gavin and I see him nodding in assurance of, yes, that is exactly how it needs to be done. And it's not the go fast and break things approach, right? A small and measured walk before you run approach is definitely what we need to do. Develop that level of transparency and trust to then ensure that we're doing it safely. Because if we can't get that understanding, safety and public awareness and acceptance definitely go hand in hand. So, you know, Mr. Ford, with regards to safety and the safe deployment of autonomous vehicle and technology, what approach to testing and self-certifying the safety of your AV solutions? How has the JTA approached that over the last several years?
Well, you know, and Raquel, I'm going to take a little bit of liberty here. I think Jane hit on a lot of it. There is the actual safety of the operation, and then there's perception of safety related to the operation. And for public transportation, it goes without saying, our priority has always been safety, safety, safety of our customers, our passengers, our employees. And I think that is going to, that has to start first. So it's multi-pronged as it related with the JTA. And as you may be well aware, you know, we started out slow and we've tested out 8 different vehicle platforms. Why? Because while the technology is very attractive and we have a big vision for it, we really needed to look under the hood and see the various different systems that integrate and must be in harmony to actually operate a vehicle autonomously. And that was our initial steps from the very beginning in terms of walking through our journey for the U2C. We have brought on, and as part of that journey, you know, we brought on a number of consultants who are helping us build this self-certification process. So we're still in the midst of developing that, because as a federal grant recipient for our project, we have to self-certify and provide that safety certification. So we're working very closely with our regional FTA office in Atlanta, and we are going through this journey, I would say collectively and jointly, before we'll actually turn the switch on and start carrying passengers. We've engaged, I think, our disabled community. In the very beginning, we recognized that some of the early models of autonomous vehicles did not have the features that we would expect in a public transportation vehicle. And so I mentioned earlier about our partnership and working with Duval County Public Schools and working with FSCJ in terms of developing curriculum for certification of mechanics, but we also worked with our disabled community and brought them in very early on, and they helped us identify and develop what we called the Golden 20, which was a set of standards we felt that autonomous vehicles at a minimum needed to have to be considered viable for public transportation. We've provided that to the private sector, the vehicle manufacturers that we've encountered. And we're proud to say this past January at CES, we saw 2 manufacturers actually incorporate the Golden 20 into their project and vehicle development. We will continue to work with these AV partners, both on the manufacturing side and on the technology side. We've been working very closely with OXA and Gavin's team, and working to learn more about the software stack that actually drives these vehicles and the redundant systems that need to be in place, so you don't have one point of failure related to these vehicles operating. But I think the whole point here is slow, deliberate deployment. And while there are AVs that are operating on US streets today, I think in terms of public trust and public confidence, we cannot afford to have a failure due to not having a robust safety certification process. And we are in the process of developing that now. Our launch is scheduled for mid-2025. And so there's a great deal of work to be done between now and when we get into revenue service. As you can see, I'm very bullish on this technology, but I don't want to take one step sooner than we need to. And I will always keep those principles of safety, safety, safety well before we launch our system in our operation, no matter how much of a challenge, how much pressure we're getting to, when are we going to see the vehicles, when is the system going to be operating. We will take the appropriate and deliberate time before we turn the switch on, so to speak.
I think Mr. Ford, the saying goes, slow and steady wins the race. And so I appreciate your slow and deliberate approach, because at the end of the day, you only get one shot at this, and you want to make sure that you do it right and do it safely. You touched on a really interesting and important topic, and it's that perception of safety. Right. We often find that when we deploy in other areas across the country, that the perception of safety regarding autonomous vehicles is born out of a fear and lack of understanding of how does this thing actually work. And when you draw the parallels, which I know is something the JTA has done here within the community of itself, there's a better understanding. But people in the community and other agencies need to be curious. And I hope there's one thing that everybody pulls out of this webinar. It's be curious, develop a level of understanding. Don't shy away from something because it sounds scary and it's new. So
Raquel,
perception is one. Yeah, go ahead.
Raquel, that's why we're here today.
Exactly.
That is why, as the JTA, we took this on, because there's one thing to work on the technical side within our
Correct.
bubble of Jacksonville. I think there is importance that we share data and share best practices with our peer agencies in Las Vegas, Houston, Contra Costa. We're all going through this journey together. And in Florida alone, we have multiple agencies that are working on autonomous vehicle technology, and we have the testing ground and SunTrax. So pulling all of that together will ensure that when we deploy in public transportation, we have checked every box as it relates to actual safety, perception of safety, and public acceptance for these new technologies.
Correct. And you're right. It starts with exactly how the JTA started many of those other transit agencies you had mentioned. And it's developing an understanding, and that's where you start. And by many of you who have joined this webinar today, you have really taken that first step, if this is the first step in your AV journey, to getting that much smarter on what is coming. Not if it's going to come, but it is coming, and it's here in the doorstep in many communities across the United States. So I love seeing when all of us across the board here, Jane and Carolyn and Mr. Ford talk, Gavin is nodding in reassurance. Yes, that is completely aligned with our business philosophy. So Gavin, we'd love to get you on this next question here. With regard to the pace of policy and regulation, things are moving quickly enough to encourage developers, much like yourself, particularly foreign developers. But do you think that's actually happening to shift your development and production here to the United States? And the second half of that question, it is, if not, do we possibly run the risk of losing the benefits of a robust artificial intelligence industry to foreign manufacturers?
So thank you for the question. So I think the good news here is that we are, I think, all in violent agreement that being right is better than being fast. There's no question about the safety benefits and the economic benefits that exist with autonomy. You only have to sort of look at what we're experiencing today around the world in terms of productivity dips that we're having, and empty shelves on the supermarket, and all the other things in the supply chain that worry us today, and congestion in our cities. You only have to look at all these different areas to realize that autonomy is going to benefit, and in the end, it will become the new normal. But better to do it without, as Mr. Ford was saying, without the missteps, because you have really a one-time opportunity here, I think, to do this right, to do this well, and to bring about standards and bring about that transparency that Jane was talking about, to usher in this new technology responsibly. Usher in the technology for public good, right? We have an opportunity to do it for public good and to focus there as well. And from our standpoint, we think that is, in serving the public with shared transportation and fixing some of the supply chain issues and all the things that are, more about, fixed routes, and more about careful driving, and more about being able to define and structure the places that you're going to certify. And so when it comes to inward investment, we're looking at it from a couple of different angles. The first one is, is there really appetite to do this and do this well? Are there pioneers And in Mr. Ford, we see that every day in working with the team here at Jacksonville Transport Authority. We see it every day, that the pioneering nature of what they're trying to do and to do it the right way. And so the answer is a resounding yes. The facilities here, in order for us to set up shop and to hire people and all the great work that's happening here as well in the universities, and educating the young people and convincing them to a career in robotics and AI and some of the technologies that we're going to need to bring to the world here. And the answer again is a resounding yes. And so really, what's left is the conditions around regulation. And the answer is, let's see, and let's have the open discussion and dialogue to make sure that we're using the best of all the principles and all the great thinking that's happening around the world to bring this technology to life safely and in a very assured and transparent way. And there's a whole bunch that we can learn from adjacent markets that we see and past histories, like in the airline industry, where it's very much a partnership basis. From the very beginning of the founding back in 2014 of OXA, we saw regulators and standards bearers as founders in the company. We see all of you and we see Mr. Ford as founders in the company and founders in this movement. And so we're all on the same page, and that needs to maintain. And I think the relationship that we've been having over the last decade or so, and it's taken a decade to get to this point where just last week we had the UK AV bill passed through the King's speech. It's very interesting how we do things and how we legislate in the UK. It starts with the King's speech, and then it goes through the House of Lords, and then finally into legislation through Parliament. But that was all passed last week, but it's been 10 years in the making. And you don't do that by having camps and having silos and having closed door policy. You sort of usher in this new technology, ushering in policy and regulation by being fully transparent and treating each other as partners. The key then, however, is to maintain that and to make sure that there is incentive to have that open dialogue and that transparency all the way through. And I know that we'll come on to talk a little bit about sort of data and the importance of data sharing and so on down the line. But we feel very, very buoyant about investment here. We think the conditions are right here. We saw the President Biden pass the executive order most recently to start the clock on building some legislation here as well. So we're on the clock now. But again, I just caution everybody that this is not about the everywhere autonomy problem. We should really kind of reject that as the first application of this technology. We should really think about the somewhere autonomy problem and make it come to life in the great places like Jacksonville here.
Gavin, you made a comment that I think leads great into our next question here with Ms. Flowers, and I want to reiterate it because it hit pretty close to home. It's being right is better than being fast, right? And I think that that applies not just to technology companies looking to implement this technology. The same applies as well to policy and regulation, right? It's better to be right than to pass this and then have to go back and then restructure that. So Ms. Flowers, would love for you to answer this next question. So how does the AV technology then integrate into policies and priorities of recent presidential administrations, such as innovation, infrastructure, employment, and social equity?
Well, Jane highlighted what the Trump administration did and what Secretary Chow did in terms of establishing an emergency technology task force within USDOT. And, there was a commitment to innovation and funding. So what we're faced with today is the Biden administration started during the peak of the COVID crises. And so their immediate priorities were to respond to the crisis, by controlling the spread of COVID and providing economic relief. But they had other priorities also, tackling climate change, advancing equity and civil rights, also job security, as well as restoring America's position in the world. And so when you look at the current administration's policies, the emphasis is on the innovation side has been more in terms of how we're competing with China. And so that has been the focus today. And, there've been, I think, a lot of innovation and focus around how we move EVs into into the space, as well as, what we're doing about manufacturing chips. Now, this project, U2C, has actually had to go through several administrations. And so, we look at what we can do to integrate and align with the current administration policies. And there are many benefits from U2C and advanced AV technology. And one is the societal cost savings. You're looking at what AVs can do in terms of reducing accidents and reducing all of the issues around the costs of accidents on our healthcare system. And we can look at AV's contribution to fuel savings and more efficient transportation. Traffic efficiency in terms of AV being able to determine the best routes to eliminate congestion. And then Nat told a story of how AVs can provide better access to transportation for those who cannot or choose not to drive. And being one that is moving toward elderly, looking at those opportunities to use AVs rather than drive is something that I'm looking forward into the future. And then the other issue that the administration is pushing is climate change. And so AVs are more environmentally friendly. They tend to be electric, but they also can drive many efficiencies. And so when we look at all the debates around climate change right now, anything that can contribute to the improvement in climate and GHG is, I think, really important. So contributing to reducing emissions and becoming more environmentally sustainable are ways that we can align with the current administration's policies.
Thank you, Ms. Flowers. In fact, I think delivering on those societal cost savings that you're talking about can really only be achieved if you really develop technology that is shared, that is electric, and that can move more people with less, right? You don't want to be in a scenario where it's a one-to-one replacing one combustion vehicle with another vehicle, right? You're really going to move the needle when you achieve those three things. So, when it comes to policy and regulation for the federal government, data is always a big talking point as well, because, data is great, but it needs to tell a story to develop that safety case. So Gavin, when it comes to data, I know that's really the crux of your organization and how you would safely advance this. So data is the driver for many of those decisions for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, short for us, called NHTSA. So what do you think, and do you think enough data currently exists as it is today for NHTSA to formulate that policy? And let's start there.
Well, so I think there's plenty of data. Is whether the data is being used and whether it's being used consistently to keep a level playing field and to knowingly know what problems you're trying to solve. Because actually, I think that in the subjects of autonomous vehicles, we tend to conflate all things into one area. Mm-hmm. So I'll give it a specific example about one of the things that was passed in the UK AV bill most recently was just one of segmentation and distinguishing between the sort of user in charge self-driving vehicles and then the non-user in charge self-driving vehicles, and where sort of liability sort of might live in there. And it's going to need to be different legislation for both of those things. If I was a legislator and I was looking at all of it in the round and I was trying to solve everything with one high bar for all applications of autonomy, I wouldn't know where to start. And so segmenting the market and segmenting the uses of autonomy and the types of data that you're going to need to share is kind of step one, and that's something I think we can bring to the conversation in a meaningful way. The other part then is about what inside of your operational design domain, what have you done to evidence that you're a careful and competent software driver in that space, and how do you test for that? Because you never want to be in a situation where the vehicles are driving in the place of operation, inside of the ODD, and then for whatever reason, and there are almost infinite reasons, for whatever reason, somehow you fall out of the ODD. So it's okay to understand, what you've been tested against, the fidelity of your test regimes, and sharing those test regime so that you can be certified in that place to operate in that speed and in those conditions in the first instance. But what happens at runtime? What happens when you are operating the vehicle, and what types of data should you share in the event of something happening? And then the last part of that is about what happens when something happens, and how and the decision making, and how transparent and explainable your technology is. So I think because in some regards, the way that the software technology has been developed in Europe versus the US is that we really started with the auditability at the core, right? So our entire AV system was designed to be explainable from the very get-go. So the first things we built were the audit system. So explainability, explaining how the system made the decisions it made, the entire root and branch fault tree of what happens and why, and trying to explain that in human language that people can understand and relate to, and then package all of that in a sort of a digital twin for every journey that we make. And the key is as well is that as we're going through this, it's not only about being explainable so you can then apportion blame and liability, which is important in legislation, but it's also about that airline sort of model of really kind of constant improvement. And what you really want to have is that, again, that ownership, that shared partnership with legislators and regulators, where you're able to share the near miss data, or you're able to share something that you've observed in the operation that you can share with the entire community, and then not get penalized for the fact that you've been open about this flaw that you've discovered. So it really needs to be always a two-way partnership, partially to have continuous improvement, but also partially to assign liability. And again, that's really kind of it's impossible to start that conversation unless you're actually apportioning and segmenting the differences between a user in charge self-driving vehicle and a non-user in charge self-driving vehicle. So we've segmented that now in the UK. We expect that will be a feature of legislation and regulation for other nations as well, and we expect that also to be harmonized at the United Nations, which is where we're also operating there. But these are the things that we think are important.
Gavin, you bring up a good point about humanizing the explanation and having it in some words that, frankly, I always approach it as, if my mother can't understand it or my husband can't understand it, who's not in this space, then we're not doing a good enough job to explain how does this actually work. A lot of that has to deal with, understanding the purpose of data and creating these policies and regulations. So Jane, my next question for you is specifically with regard to industry. So do you think the industry should be, what do you think the industry should be doing, frankly, guidance, of course, from myself and Gavin and others on this webinar, when it comes to liability, cybersecurity, and privacy, so they're not a deterrent to forward movement of technology?
Well, I'd say that liability, cybersecurity, and privacy are all issues within the larger issue of safety. And I think we've all said it today, that safety is paramount. As Secretary Chow used to use the phrase, safety is always number one. So you want to be able to continue to develop without compromising safety. And so we established that at the department while I was there, not only for the US DOT, but for the broader government, posture for all surface transportation automated vehicles, and launched the first ever AV test initiative, which I think has helped connect developers, operators, manufacturers, and the government to promote safe testing and deployment of AVs. So including the first exemption for an AV vehicle. But what I believe that we really learned from all of that, and what the industry could take away from that, is that, and I think we've said it already, I think that Ford has said it, and I've said it, Carolyn has said it, Gavin said it, is the approach that we take in the industry, this incremental approach to autonomous travel. That is so important, because not all autonomous technology is going to advance at the same pace. Correct. So operating AVs at lower speeds and on planned routes with defined environments, I think really helps us define some of those other issues like liability and cybersecurity. So I think having that approach would allow us to continue to move forward and development of the technology, but allowing it to develop in a way that we can educate the public and we can bring the industry along and work on the cybersecurity and privacy and liability issues as they're raised. But the more you keep this in a controlled environment, the less cybersecurity, liability, and privacy are a problem. So I think having the technology develop in that way will help us have time to develop. The liability issues is incredibly complex, as is cybersecurity and privacy. So I think, that's what we learned while I was at USDOT, is you want to continue to allow the technology to advance, but to advance in a way that is controlled enough that you don't have additional problems. And so I would encourage the industry to take that incremental approach, not everywhere to everywhere. You can take an autonomous vehicle from any point to any point. Having it be in a more controlled environment, I think, will help give the industry time to actually work on the other issues that certainly are going to need to be dealt with prior to full automation.
Right, so there definitely are challenges, and when I think of challenges, I look at them as opportunities to grow and to do it safely, right? And start of addressing that challenge and creating an opportunity starts with defining, right? How do we define certain things? So for those of you just leaning into the AV conversation, just so you know, NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, has established standard levels of autonomy. So they range anywhere from a level 0, where you completely need to have your hands on the wheel. The vehicle, you need to tell the vehicle where to go, all the way up to level 5, which is fully automated. So Mr. Flowers, this question is for you. Do you think it will be a challenging road to regulate the interplay between all these different levels, and how do you think that could work?
Well, I think we're already seeing the challenge. And I think people who've been following Tesla know that there's a challenge, especially at level 3. And level 3 is when you move beyond just driver assistance. It's no longer cruise control. It's no longer your car, taking over to keep you in a lane, but your car actually having the ability, with you're paying attention, and that's very, very key, with your paying attention, to actually to drive in an autonomous mode. But I want to just say, Gavin said something about harmonization. And one of the big challenges here in the United States is we have 50 states who all put out their own legislative, regulations. And so harmonization is a real challenge. And that's why the feds have to step in and take on that role and responsibility. And thus far, it's really difficult to simplify the regulatory apparatus in this country. And so NHTSA, has released some rules to try to promote innovation, at the same time protect consumers and riders. And so, they've come up with these checklists, a 15-point checklists, and they they talk about all of the issues that Jane was talking about: data, privacy, cybersecurity, crashworthiness, education and training, post-crash behavior, federal, state, and local laws. And one of the big one right now is ethical considerations. And that is the one that I think is the most scary and the most challenging. But right now, it's voluntary reporting more so than actually having standard regulations. And so, the hurdle, I said that curdle, the hurdle is getting people comfortable with the ethical decision that the machine will make. And so there is a lot of concern, especially after the most recent issues with Cruise, about, can the vehicle make the decision that would probably be the least drastic or least critical if they have to make a choice. And so I think that's something that we still have to, get through. But one thing was with AI, I think the algorithms will improve, that will, reduce the level of scrutiny as we transition to level 4 and 5, where you make the leap from human intervention to total machine intervention. And so we have to look at, what we can do in terms of increasing that level of scrutiny and getting the comfort level. And then I think the other responsibility of NHTSA and even USDOT, FTA being involved also, it may be time to review the processes for rulemaking and to support the ability to attract and create new jobs in this country, such as phasing in Buy America requirements over a period of time, to reach the thresholds that are currently required. Or, NHTSA can look at implementation standards, and FTA could also re-examine the depreciable life cycle of vehicles. Those are all the things that U2C is facing as they go into service implementation that probably need to be resolved to ensure that we can have a process for all agencies to implement AV.
Carolyn, you said so many things that I'm frantically writing down that I wish we had so much more time to talk about, because you just opened up a whole new can of discussion. But a couple key points that I want to pull out here before I turn the next question over to Mr. Ford. But there is a very, very delicate balance between risk and reward. And I feel that is exactly where we are when it comes to this type of technology, with really achieving and delivering those societal cost savings that you talked about. The other one was creating the on-ramp for Buy America. We cannot have that unless we create those benchmarks and milestones to bring manufacturing back to the United States, so that companies like Gavin's and others in industry can feel comfortable coming to the United States, because they know there are benchmarks for them to meet and incremental steps for them to take to feel secure in bringing manufacturing back here to the U.S. And that goes back to exactly what Gavin talked about, is you need to incentivize the dialogue, make it welcome for the discussion, so that they can help provide insight on what those standards and what that on-ramp can look like, and what is achievable in the very near term. It's a very delicate balance when you look at balancing policy and regulation. So onto our topic of government regulation, and Mr. Ford. Government regulation, is it keeping up? My question to you is, do you think the government regulation will be able to keep up with these rapid advancements in technology? And how do you recommend we balance that risk?
Raquel, of course I do. I'm always going to be positive that government is part of the solution. They're not part of the problem. But, as government, sometimes it can slow some of the progress. And I don't say this in a critical way, because as a public servant, I, along with other public servants, we have the responsibility to balance the needs of going really fast. And we need to consider that with an eye towards not being reckless and not being so stagnant that we become a roadblock in what we're doing. But we do have that responsibility as it relates to safe deployment, and particularly in this case, when it relates to new technology. So that's the role of public servants, to balance the risk as well as the reward. I think that government at all levels can be as proactive as they choose to be. Here in Florida, for example, our legislature has approved laws that allow us to be viable to compete in this space, promoting innovation that will lead to the deployment of autonomous vehicles in this community. And I would say that leveraging autonomous vehicles, and as the JTA, using our success story, will give us an opportunity to signal that the industry, we're ready for full deployment. And so we recognize it's important that the JTA, in our role as public servants, we lead in this effort. And that's why we're here today, so we can bring together our colleagues across the globe now, with Gavin joining us today, and as well as across the country, to talk about some of these challenges and how we should manage the risk. But I think we also really need to do a great job of educating as it relates to understanding these autonomous vehicles. It's much more than just deploying a vehicle on the road. There are so many other pieces of the puzzle that must come together to create an ecosystem to support this technology and this mobility. I think the synergy that we need to create and succeed with, as it relates to a synergy in standards and regulations and policies. We can't have one state or one city or one transportation agency operating under one set of regulations and policies, and other states doing something totally different, or organizations doing something totally different. And I think by sharing the information that and safety practices that we put together, I think is important, and it'll help us advance the technology faster. So while there's government as it relates to FTA, US DOT, and NHTSA, we also have a responsibility as the initiators and implementers of these new technologies and creating that synergy between the two entities. I think it's critical every step of the way, the strength of our partnerships as we move forward. And there will be policy decision makings at every level, at the local level, at the state level, and the federal level. And to them, I think my message is join us in this journey as we learn together. And I'm so pleased with the work that we are doing with US DOT and with FTA and NHTSA. They are working with us so that we learn and move forward with this journey together. And I'll take one more moment too. As it relates to foreign investment and the creation of jobs, we truly believe in build America, buy America, build America. And the opportunity that I think we have two great opportunities. It is really an opportunity through our development of education for our local constituents. We have an opportunity to educate them on these new technologies. And I think we also have an opportunity to create new jobs and opportunities going into the future with foreign investment in terms of technology in our community. So I think we're at an exciting time frame. I would not say that government regulations are a hindrance. They're there for a reason, but it's incumbent upon all of the players in this ecosystem to work together, create that synergy, and deliver these first-class, world-class technology solutions.
I love what you said. There are lots of S's, synergy and standards, and that starts with not working in silos. So I'm going to add another S to your synergy and standardization. You can't work in a silo. You know, we need to condense that conversation and dialogue and incentivize that dialogue as well from private industry to help inform the policy and regulation. I know we're nearing the end of this call, but I always love to do a call to action to all of our attendees. So would love to go round robin across the room. Mr. Ford, we'll start with you. Last question is, what can the viewers do who are joining this call, who will watch this after the webinar? What can they do to support the progression and wide-scale deployment of autonomous vehicles in the United States?
I think in this day and age, with social media moving so fast, there's unfortunate opportunities for information that's incorrect to be pushed out. And if we see incorrect information, we have a responsibility to put correct information out there, lead people to the real answers related to these technologies. As you said in the very beginning, Raquel, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And so the socialization of this technology, the benefits to our community, and then also pushing back or questioning inaccurate information and providing accurate information is important as we move forward. And so with that, thank you, Raquel, for being our host on this particular webinar.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Ford. Ms. Williams, last call to action to those joining the call today.
I would say that regardless of whether or not, to the public transportation industry, regardless of whether you're not, maybe you're not NAP, maybe you're not far ahead of the process on AVs, but stay engaged, be informed, look at the scalability and try to encourage the acceptance, because this technology is coming and it's here. And so we have to work as a public transportation industry to bring it into our industry. And I think staying informed with where things are, whether or not you have an AV project or not, is incredibly important for the public transportation space. And thank you, Raquel, for hosting us today.
Thank you so much, Ms. Williams. And Gavin?
Very, very similar. I would say, be engaged in the conversation. I think, again, back to my earlier comments, I think that the benefits are going to be enormous for society, and we have time to realize those benefits. Let's do it right. It's definitely a marathon and not a sprint. I think the really good news is, and this is exactly how JTA is thinking about this, is that actually there's a whole lot of trust and value that can be built in the simplest of applications. As Jane was saying earlier on, the low speed, repeatable mundane robotic tasks. There's value right there for society already. So let's start there. Produce a project for your city, for your authority that is low-hanging fruit, that builds trust and builds value in the first few miles of this marathon.
Great, thank you so much, Gavin. And Ms. Flowers, last question for you.
Excuse me. I think I'm going to change the word from engagement to be advocates. It's, you don't move the needle without having advocates. I read a quote in a Brookings Institute white paper that governments can accelerate or slow the movement towards self-driving vehicles by the manner in which they regulate. So if you don't have advocates who are bringing this issue forward, the government will not pay attention. A squeaky wheel, is the one that gets the attention. So we need to ensure that we have voices that are supporting AV, and we need to make sure that it's a clear and high priority for policymakers as we move forward. So we also should look at best practices. So it's I think incumbent upon everyone to make sure that they look at what's going on in other countries. Gavin talked about the UK. Jane talked about Germany. We need to look at what's going on in the world. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we do need the advocacy to move it forward in this country.
Thank you so much, Ms. Flowers. And if I could add 3, because I always like to add 3. So 1, ask questions and be curious. I think many of you have achieved that by being on this call today. The second is please read beyond the headline and don't stop at the headline when you see something in news about AVs. And the third is an easy one, and it's something you can do immediately after this webinar. Share it with 5 people. And it goes definitely what Ms. Flowers was talking about, help create that level of engagement and advocacy. And it starts with a level of education, understanding of where things are and where they're going. So this hour did go incredibly fast. And so thank you for hanging on. And again, thank you for this incredible discussion from across the country and across the globe. It has absolutely gone fast. So thank you so much. The incredible information that our panelists shared here today. Your words and your guidance and your information is truly moving the needle. And to our audience, I cannot say thank you enough for taking that first step. If this is your first step in the understanding an AV journey, if you believe, as we do, that autonomous vehicle technology is a step forward to really deliver on those societal cost savings that Ms. Flowers was talking about, share this, learn more, continue to lean in and be an educator as well for those future generations, because we want to see these dreams become a reality, because at the end of the day, this world will be far better off than we left it. And to leave you all with a quote, because I love leaving with a quote, and it was something that a friend texted me with, and this is by Winston Churchill, and I think it's very appropriate here. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. And the courage that is on this call today, I hope, continues to reinforce all of us to continue on this journey, because we will continue to succeed if we do it together, not in those silos. So with that, I invite you to stay vigilant. Please watch out for more information regarding the next webinar series as we continue elevating this conversation on autonomous vehicles and policy and regulatory issues. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much to fellow panelists.
Thank you, Raquel.
Thank you.